During a time in ancient Israel, the land was in the grip of a severe drought. The sky was dry with no rain, the rivers and streams dried up, the crops withered, and the ground cracked under the relentless heat. In this situation, the people were bewildered and disoriented. But in the midst of this harshness, a man appeared named Elijah. He was unlike any other, because he put his complete trust in God. Instead of complaining, he listened to God and obeyed his commands. To avoid the pursuit of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who were turning the people away from God and toward idols, Elijah hid by the brook Cherith. When Elijah took refuge in the brook Cherith, following God's guidance, he was completely cut off from society, living in isolation in the midst of arid nature. Yet despite his isolation, he lacked nothing, for God himself provided for him supernaturally. Every day, black ravens brought him bread and meat, a phenomenon that could not be explained by human reason. While people desperately searched for food and water, Elijah was provided for by heaven. This was not only a matter of survival, but also clear evidence of God's power and providence for the faithful. However, as time passed, the brook gradually dried up. When the water at Cherith dried up, God did not abandon Elijah. He commanded him to go to a small town called Zarephath, where a widow was in dire need. She had only enough flour and oil left for one last meal with her son before they both starved to death. But Elijah, sent by God, not only begged for food but also gave her a promise from God. If she would believe and share her meager food with him first, the jar of flour and jug of oil would never run out until the rains came again. With great faith, the woman did so, and the prophecy came true. All three survived the drought thanks to a miraculous act of God. Just when life seemed to be settling down, a heartbreaking event occurred. The widow's only son fell seriously ill and died, leaving her in deep grief. Filled with grief and resentment, she turned to Elijah, accusing him of bringing evil upon her home. But Elijah did not argue. Instead, he took the child up to the attic, laid him on the bed, and prayed fervently to God. With unwavering faith, he begged God to restore the child to life. And God heard him. Life rid the child's body. The boy began to breathe again, leaving the widow deeply moved and declaring that Elijah was truly a man of God, and that his words were the truth from God. After a long period of seclusion, God commanded Elijah to appear publicly and confront King Ahab, who had led the Israelites away from God to worship Baal. Elijah obeyed, went to Mount Carmel, and challenged the prophets of Baal, who claimed to be the mouthpieces of false gods. Before the crowd, he proposed a test to distinguish the true God from the false. Both sides would prepare an offering, place it on the altar, but no fire was lit. Instead, each side would call upon their God to bring down fire from heaven to consume the offering. Elijah wanted the people to see for themselves who had the real power, the Lord or the Baal they were worshiping. The prophets of Baal began to pray from dawn to dusk, shouting, dancing, and even cutting themselves to attract their God's attention, but there was no response. Elijah mocked them, and then it was his turn. Before praying, he rebuilt the destroyed altar of God, placed the sacrifice on it, and poured water on the altar 3 times until it filled the surrounding trench, making it impossible to light a fire. Then he prayed simply but with faith, asking God to show that he was the true God. Immediately, a stream of fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, wood, stone, and water, all in an instant. The people were stunned, bowed down, and shouted, "You alone are the true God." After the people returned to worshiping God, Elijah climbed Mount Carmel and began praying for rain. At first, the sky remained clear, but he did not give up, instructing his servants to keep looking out toward the sea. Finally, a small cloud the size of a hand appeared. From there, the sky darkened, winds rose, and the first heavy rain in years of drought fell, bringing life to the land and hope to the people. But the joy was short-lived, as Queen Jezebel, angry at the killing of the prophets of Baal, threatened to kill Elijah. Facing the threat of death, Elijah fled into the wilderness. As Elijah wandered in the desert, falling into despair, he felt as if he were the only one remaining faithful to God. Exhausted and sad, he lay under a tree and begged to die. But God did not abandon him. An angel appeared to him, touched him, and gave him food and water. After his physical recovery, Elijah continued on to Mount Horeb, where he hid in a cave. There, God revealed himself not as an earthquake, a great wind or a fire, but as a gentle whisper. In the silence, Elijah recognized God's gentle yet powerful presence. At the end of their eventful journey, as Elijah and Elisha were walking together, a great event occurred. A chariot of fire drawn by flaming horses appeared from the sky, separated them, and then carried Elijah up into the sky in a whirlwind. Elijah did not experience a normal death, but was taken directly to heaven, a clear sign of his special relationship with God. Elisha, the faithful student, witnessed this supernatural scene and received his master's mantle, a symbol of his prophetic authority and responsibility. Elijah's journey was a living testament to God's power and faithfulness, teaching people about enduring faith, courage, and unconditional obedience.